Welcome to Bridging Connections, China ROK Dialogue on Exchange and Cooperation. I'm Wang Mengmang in Beijing. Under the APEC mechanism, exchanges between China and ROK are becoming more diverse and multidimensional. The mutual visa-free policy has made travel easier in 2025. Cooperation in tourism, education, technology, and media continue to develop. Communication helps deepen understanding, strengthen friendship, and promote confidence. Communication also creates new opportunities for cooperation. And today we are very much delighted to be joined by Professor Kim Do-kyung and Professor Lee Za-young from Hanyang University in the Republic of Korea, Professor Zhang Gung from the University of International Business and Economics, and Professor Wang Xinsong from Beijing Normal University. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. So why don't we begin our discussion with tourism? Let's talk about this, Professor Lee. This reciprocal visa-free policy between China and the ROK in recent years have really made travel easier for people from both countries. Tell us about the changes that you've observed and how do you view this phenomenon? Especially since September, the introduction of the reciprocal visa-free policy. A lot of people are starting to spend weekends in each other's countries. What would you say about this new trend?
Well, it's certainly a very positive and welcome trend, I think. I've seen more and more Chinese travelers in Seoul and South Korea in general. And as far as I know, the number of Chinese visitors to South Korea peaked at over 8 million around 2016. However, it dropped sharply during the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, the number has started to rebound, and I think the recent visa-free policy for Chinese travelers has further accelerated this recovery. And I believe this will foster not just more tourism, but also wider cultural and academic exchanges, and that can deepen mutual understanding between China and South Korea.
Sure. Well, Professor Gung, how can both countries leverage tourism to offer more cultural exchanges, perhaps like homestays or other cultural exchange programs?
Well, I think both sides have a long history of interaction. Our relationship traces back to many centuries ago. I think Korean, Republic of Korean people and China been always maintain a fairly good relationship. I think the exchanges definitely go well beyond just at the tourism level. I think exchanges would encompass areas in academic exchanges. For example, I can speak of my university. Professor Lee mentioned there are many Chinese students at her institution, and it's the same way that our university also has a fairly large population of Korean students attending our programs as well. And beyond these academic exchanges, I think at a corporate level, I think Korean business and Chinese business have a lot of interactions. Quite a few Korean companies here operating in Beijing and in other big cities in China, and naturally there will be a community of Korean Korean workers, employees, sort of living in these cities. In Beijing, used to be a fairly large community actually, and I think going with it, there's also activities associated with that. Restaurants, places for cultural activities and all these things. So I think, at all these levels, it's very healthy to see that there is plenty of interactions between peoples on both sides. And let me also finish by saying that I've visited Korea a couple of times in the past, Republic of Korea a couple of times, visited Seoul a couple of times, and it's a great place to visit.
Yeah, sure. Let's hear from Professor Kim there, because we know that people-to-people connectivity is really the foundation for bilateral relations. How can the two countries expand their cultural connections even further in ways that perhaps better resonate with the younger generation?
Yes, in my perspective, the two countries, China and Korea, throughout the long history of relationships have already built a strong connection already, based on cultural proximity. But in today's media environment shaped by digital network and participatory culture, I think the key to deepening the cultural exchange for younger generations lies in rethinking the definition of what really cultural exchange actually means. Because cultural exchange is no longer just limited to, formal institutional programs like student exchange programs or tourism or joint degrees in universities or government-led initiatives, but it happens much more naturally and voluntarily throughout everyday interaction across digital platforms. The routes and trajectories of culture exchange have become more organic now. They collaborate, they remix and reinterpret the cultural events and products, some sort of formal cultural exchange programs to lead their way. And so to make the bilateral cultural exchange more relevant and active to this generation, initiatives across multiple levels need to embrace this participatory logic. So instead of one-way promotion of natural culture or national culture through formalized programs, programs should leverage on these everyday media habits of these generations so that they can open up spaces for them to curate their own way of exchanges online.
Professor Wang here in Beijing, beyond tourism, what do you see as some of the other ways to promote non-governmental exchanges between peoples of the two countries? What kind of impact could such exchanges bring to the local communities, be it economic or cultural impact?
Well, first of all, I think multifaceted exchanges over the areas, tourism, education, technology, media, etc., are all very important because after all, the two peoples need more communication exchanges in order to better understand each other, especially considering the fact that I agree with Professor Kim on the point that nowadays media has played a very much influential role on people's minds and attitudes toward each other, and sometimes we can be compartmentalized in terms of what information we get. So really, on-the-ground exchanges between peoples are all very helpful, and I'd like to echo Professor Kim's point also on the digital space, where it is becoming ever more important for the younger generations to interact with each other, as opposed to the conventional ways of academic institutional exchanges. And for example, if you think about the tourism that's becoming very popular for people from ROK in China, I understand many of them got information from Xiaohongshu or Red Note, which is a very popular social media form here in China. In order to get the information about tourist sites before they come over here. So that's an example showing how social media can play a role, bridging the gap of information asymmetry between the two peoples. Another example is the popularity of Labubu, which did not become popular just as a result of government promotion. Rather, it was a very organic and natural process to the popularity and influences in new social media.
Well, social media is indeed playing a very significant role in shaping the way of thinking as well as habits for a lot of young generation around the world, global audience, of course. So, Professor Lee, from your point of view, how should school education perhaps influence the way how social media is impacting the younger generation to allow them to use the digital media more rationally, while also, fully leveraging its positive impacts?
Yeah, it's a very hard question. Well, not just for students, but for my kids too, and myself too. Digital media is just now a very core part of young people's social and also intellectual lives. So instead of strictly limiting their use, I think education should focus on digital literacy and teaching students how to verify information, understand algorithms, and express their views more responsibly through social media. So schools should also encourage students to use social media as a tool for creativity and global connection, rather than just comparison, social comparison or distraction. So guiding them toward mindful and ethical use will help ensure that digital platforms empower rather than control or limit or distract the next generation. And the detailed how-to will be a hard question we should all, wrestle with.
Yeah. Let me also ask Professor Gong on this, because we understand that social media is such a huge part of the youth culture in both countries. Various platforms have made information and the cultures more accessible to a global audience. What role does social media play in influencing perceptions of both countries?
Well, I couldn't overemphasize enough, the immensely important role the social media platforms play these days in influencing people, in a way, educating people, communicating with people. I think, these platforms are extremely powerful, even though the content actually created by the viewers themselves. It's in general, I would say it's a good thing, but we also have to, keep in mind that, not all media are sort of not unbiased. Sometimes there could be a bias. So we have to be a little bit careful, a little bit selective, a little bit exercising some sense of judgment. But I think here, at least in China, maybe also in ROK, we are very friendly countries. I think that's the bottom line. And I think in general, people at large still harbor a fairly friendly attitude towards each other. I don't see much of a problem at all on social media in terms of exchanges, in terms of communications between the two sides, especially among young people. I think recently I noticed that there are actually a lot of young people from Republic of Korea visiting Shanghai, for example, my hometown, and it was very popular, and I think it was widely reported here in the news here in China, and I think the relationship between the young people between the two countries are really moving into a very positive direction.
Well, social media connects people. On the other hand, it could also sometimes amplify misunderstandings. So, Professor Wang, let me ask you this. Have you seen cases where such misunderstandings or stereotypes have been amplified or observed in social media usage?
Yeah, I've seen cases for sure after social media has become so popular for so many years, not just being limited to the relations between China and ROK, but across the world, you've seen many cases where issues of controversy can be amplified, exaggerated, and distorted. So there's no doubt that social media can have negative impacts on people's opinions toward each other. But at the same time, we should not completely deny the values of social media, which at the same time creates many opportunities for people to get information from about the world, and especially when geopolitics sometimes can get in the way, so social media becomes a place where people can find it easier to communicate and learn from each other. I remember when TikTok became a controversial issue in the US, a lot of American influencers and users of TikTok moved to Red Note. And that was a quite interesting scene where the Chinese users and the American users and global users all of a sudden met each other much more easily and communicated with each other. And surprisingly, they found that they share very similar sentiments, pressure, anxiety, or pleasure.
And language was no longer the barrier
Language
there.
was never a barrier because now technologically all these barriers can be wiped out, right? So overall, I think we should view social media in a more objective manner.
Let's talk about education now. And let me ask Professor Kim this question, because we know that education is such an important pillar of cross-cultural exchange. And your school, Hanyang University, has been instrumental in fostering academic collaborations between our two countries. A lot of Chinese students are pursuing degrees there at Hanyang. So tell us about the changes in academic cooperation you've seen over the years.
I believe the university and research institutions can hold a very unique role in building, bridges across cultures, and training cultural understandings for future talents. these institutions can play a vital role as incubators of cross-cultural creativity and innovative collaboration. And I've seen that the cooperation between Korean and Chinese institutions and universities has been expanded in the past, and it's continued to expanding. But I think that in the future, now that we're surrounded by these digital media and new technologies, that gives us the platforms of connectivity, and that allows us to creatively collaborate and learn with one another. I think universities can, in the future, design sort of a joint creation-based programs where students from both countries can work together to produce something meaningful and tangible, whether that's a form of a short film or a digital campaign or a social innovation project. So, yeah, I think the key to such collaboration model in the future is in turning the academic learning and exchange process into a shared meaning-making process rather than going back and forth and exchanging students or cultural products. So this way, I think it can help students see themselves not as delegates or representatives of nations, but as partners tackling common challenges and working on common projects with one another.
And in the broader cultural context, Professor Lee, we understand both China and the ROK are East Asian cultures. Their students are often extremely hardworking. How would you compare the similarities and differences when it comes to, the mechanism as well as the concepts of talent development in both countries?
Oh, yes. Well, both China and ROK share a deep respect for hard work and education, and that has been the driving force behind our rapid development. And also, I think that is the distinct characteristic of Asian educational system that is a little different from the Western educational system. And I actually observed that a lot from my students too. Well, both Korean and Chinese students are very highly motivated and they take learning very seriously. And I sometimes feel it's part of the shared cultural DNA, just education focused. And both countries' students, really, they are into developing themselves. And the idea of combining individual excellence with collective contribution has been central to the concept of talent development in both societies too. But I also see that both countries are now rethinking what talent really means. And it is no longer just about academic success, but also about creativity and social responsibility, and also global communication and awareness too. And I find it encouraging that schools and universities in both countries are trying to create more holistic systems, holistic perspectives to nurture well-rounded talent. And while also if we compare our system with the Western educational system, we regard the Western system is more focused on individuality and self-expression. And while now I think we can complement our own strengths of our educational system with this kind of approach that focuses more on flexibility and creativity and more independent thinking, and finding the right balance between structure and innovation will be crucial for the next stage of talent development in this digital world, digital age we live in.
Professor Kim, let me get back to you. How might media and education help shape a more inclusive and interconnected Asia-Pacific community in the future?
Yeah, for me, media and education are the two most powerful infrastructures for building an inclusive, interconnected community across regions, especially as we now enter an increasingly, digitally mediated, interconnected media landscape. of course, while government policies and economic agreements and that happening at the macro level still matters, I believe it is through communication and sharing a shared learning experience that mutual understanding truly happens. And speaking of the media side, media can play as a offer space for mutual recognition and shared imagination, and through like co-produced documentaries or transnational storytelling, media definitely has the ability to nurture a collective imagination of the Asia Pacific community. But again, with the growing media influence also comes with a great responsibility. So media can either break down the barriers between cultures or even reinforce the barriers depending on how it's used. So for it to contribute to a genuine regional cooperation, media programs and platforms must remain inclusive, open to collaboration, and be respectful with neighboring cultures. And I believe this is the point where education can play a huge role in. And as echoing what other professors have previously said, to build an inclusive community, educators and educational institutions should really prioritize on building and honing media literacy and digital literacy, especially critical literacy, beyond just emphasizing only the technical skills or creative production skills of media, especially when misinformation and disinformation these days can be easily spread to strengthen the existing barriers. So I personally think that in the future, the keyword that media practitioners and educational institutions should all remember and reflect in their strategic way forward is not about how we can better show or speak one's visions and values, but more about how we can better listen and embrace the differences, within this growing algorithmic curated media landscape that further pushes people, away from one another to the polar opposite opinions.
Better listening to each other is certainly a key point in facilitating communication between the two sides. Professor Wang, China and the ROK share similarities in a lot of things. For example, in communication styles and interpersonal etiquette, both cultures emphasize, when they communicate with each other, they emphasize consideration, understanding, and respect in interactions. What kind of advantages do such shared values convey, or what advantages do they bring to the exchange and cooperation between the two sides?
Cultural affinity or proximity plays a very important role in bridging the gap between the two peoples, and that makes it much easier for the two peoples to understand each other and sometimes to be familiar with each other. But at the same time, I think the traditional values obviously are being overwhelmed by the globalization process, where values coming from the rest of the world, especially the West, are becoming more dominant. That's why I think countries across the world, not just being limited to East Asia, are searching for their traditional cultures, and we see this happening everywhere in the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Latin America, and in this part of the world. So that means that, on the one hand, we of course embrace the globalized value system, but at the same time, we should never forget, we should never give up on our traditional values. So both countries have a long way to go in pursuing a balanced manner or balanced structure where both traditional culture and globalized value system can be further combined more organically, and that search is going to be a very huge test for China and ROK and for many other countries in the world.
Both countries are deeply rooted in their traditions, and they also share culinary traditions and the respect for traditional festivals. Professor Gong, tell us about your observation in the cultural impact that both countries have had on each other.
I think I totally agree with Professor Wang that over the decades, both countries, by being more exposed to the globalization, by being more integrated into globalization, have been affected in sort of maintaining or sticking to the very traditional values and ways of doing things. Now, that reminds me of my graduate study days in the United States, together with my Korean students. I think at the time I have a very, very deep impression of Korean students and their families, how they, organize things. I remember when we go to a party at their home, it's a very traditional way of presenting, introducing the guests and also organizing the dinner, for example. It's a very traditional way. I think, it's. I'm really skeptical these days. Remains very much the same. I think, especially Korean women in these days are much, much different from maybe decades ago in terms of their their role in the family, their role in society. It has hugely been transformed. And to some extent, China has been exposed to the same thing. There's these structural changes in society that are very different from the old days. Compared to hundreds of years ago, how women in China play their role in society and in families. And these are, in general, quite positive development. Nevertheless, I would still say that there's a balance between keeping the traditional values as well as keeping up with the Professor Wang mentioned the globalized value system, and I think these are a bit of a challenge for both countries, and I think we are all learning by doing, and we are all improving along the way.
Well, Professor Lee, as an educator and a media professional yourself, what initiatives or programs do you hope to see in bridging cultural connections between China and ROK in the near future?
Oh, a very good question. Well, actually, I was very deeply impressed by the development of AI research in China. Well, that is represented by DeepSeek, for example. And I thought, we have exchange students system, and we can create a environment for students from both countries to work together for a project, and also inside our countries, in each country, we can work with the industry, companies and brands. So there are these academia and industry collaboration systems. But I thought maybe if we can create an opportunity for Korean students to work with Chinese industry, people in the industry in China, and also Chinese students who work with Korean brands, Korean companies, and that will be amazing. Well, that was just my initial reaction when I heard your question. Maybe there are multiple steps to take to make this happen, but I thought, why not? Well, we can do this kind of multicultural, multinational academia industry collaboration, and that will actually create something we never imagined. So because we have this shared culture, shared tradition, shared values, and also we have our own uniqueness in both countries. So maybe that might be one idea.
Well, our discussion today is a powerful reminder that friendship endures through mutual trust and exchanges keep understanding alive. And hopefully our exchange today will mark a new start for more in-depth interactions between our two nations. I'd like to thank all our guests for joining us today, Professor Kim Do-kyung and Professor Lee Ja-in from Hanyang University in the Republic of Korea, Professor Zhang Gung from the University of International Business and Economics, and Professor Wang Xinsong from Beijing Normal University. And I do hope that we're going to have a chance to speak again soon. That's going to do it for Bridging Connections, China ROK Dialogue on Exchange and Cooperation. Thanks for joining us.